The champagne tasted like ashes in Elara Vance's mouth, even before she knew her gilded life was about to shatter into a million unforgivable pieces. Blackwood Manor, their sprawling Ethelberg estate, was ablaze with light, a beacon of opulence against the velvet drape of the spring evening. Tonight was her night, her birthday. But was it really? The air, thick with the scent of imported lilies and the murmur of Ethelberg's most influential, also hummed with an almost unbearable tension, a taut wire of unspoken anxieties that Elara felt coiling in her own stomach. How could a room so full of people feel so suffocatingly empty? Damien Blackwood. Her husband. The name alone commanded attention. A titan in the world of high finance, a man whose charisma could charm nations and whose ruthlessness in business was legendary. He was, to the world, the epitome of power, and Elara, his wife, was the elegant, seemingly serene counterpart. She played the part well, didn't she? The gracious hostess, the adoring spouse. Tonight, she wore a gown the color of a twilight sky, its fabric flowing gently over the subtle curve of her belly, a secret she held close, a fragile hope for a future she desperately wanted to believe in. A baby. Their baby. Perhaps this was the miracle they needed, the anchor to pull Damien back from the brink of whatever abyss he seemed to be teetering on. But Damien was late, inexcusably late. Each tick of the grandfather clock in the marble hall was a hammer blow against her composure. Guests, their eyes like polished stones, flickered towards her, then away, their whispers like the rustle of dry leaves. Was it pity she saw there? Or something more predatory, a gleeful anticipation of a scandal about to break? This gilded cage, for all its beauty, was also a fishbowl, and the sharks were always circling. What could they possibly be whispering about that she didn't already suspect, deep in the recesses of her fearful heart? She clutched the stem of her champagne flute, the crystal cold against her clammy palm. The champagne itself remained untouched. How could she celebrate when this gnawing dread was her only real companion? The secret she carried, her pregnancy, was supposed to be a joyful revelation tonight, a bridge across the chasm that had been widening between them. But what if Damien had another secret, a darker one, a storm he was about to unleash upon them all? The thought was a cold serpent uncoiling in the warmth of the grand ballroom. If you knew your life was about to implode, would you try to stop it or just brace for impact? Then, a new sound cut through the cultivated hum of the party. The distinct purr of a high-performance engine, followed by the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway, a collective intake of breath. Heads turned, conversations faltered. He was here. Finally. Elara felt a strange mix of relief and a fresh wave of anxiety. This was it, the moment of truth. The massive oak doors of Blackwood Manor swung inward, and there he stood. Damien Blackwood, every inch the master of his universe, his bespoke tuxedo fitting him like a second skin, his dark hair impeccably styled. But it wasn't his tardiness that sent a jolt through the room, a shockwave of disbelief and scandalous delight. No, it was the woman on his arm, a woman who was most definitely not Elara. She was stunning, yes, in a way that was both brazen and sharp, her crimson dress a slash of defiance against the more muted elegance of the Ethelberg elite. Few recognized her, but her air of possessive triumph was unmistakable. Lilith Moreau. The name would soon be on everyone's lips. As Damien Blackwood strode in, a predator in his own home, with Lilith Moreau shimmering like a dark jewel on his arm, Elara felt the first tremor of an earthquake that would redefine her world. What unspeakable betrayal was about to unfold in front of Ethelberg's elite? The air crackled, the music seemed to curdle, and every eye in the grand ballroom turned. Damien Blackwood had arrived, and he hadn't come alone. What new hell was this? The audacious arrival of Damien Blackwood with another woman, a woman whose very presence was a declaration of war, hung in the air of Blackwood Manor, thick and poisonous. But to understand the true depth of this betrayal, the sheer calculated cruelty of it, you have to look beneath the glitter, don't you? You have to peel back the layers of the facade of perfection that was the Blackwood marriage. Every fairy tale has its dark forest, and for Elara Vance, that forest was woven with threads of gold and shadowed by the towering ambition of Damien Blackwood. Damien, he wasn't just a man, he was a phenomenon. Forged in the crucible of Ethelberg's cutthroat financial district, he'd clawed his way to the zenith of Blackwood Holdings, a sprawling empire built on audacious risks and an almost supernatural ability to foresee market shifts. His charisma was a weapon, disarming competitors and dazzling the public. But beneath that polished veneer there was a core of something harder, something insatiable. He collected successes like trophies, companies, properties, and, some whispered, hearts. Was Elara just another acquisition in his billionaire lifestyle? A beautiful, socially impeccable asset to adorn his arm at galas? Their early days? Oh, they were a whirlwind. A romance that Ethelberg's society pages devoured with glee. The dashing tycoon and the elegant art historian, daughter of the esteemed Theodore Vance. They were the golden couple, their wedding the event of the decade. Photographs from that time showed genuine smiles, stolen glances, a palpable connection. They seemed unstoppable, a true power couple. But what happens when one half of that power couple begins to crave a different kind of power, a dominion that leaves no room for an equal? The shift was subtle at first. A late night at the office here, an unscheduled overseas trip there. Building the empire, my love, he'd murmur, his kisses becoming more perfunctory, his eyes already on some distant horizon. Elara couldn't see. Blackwood Holdings, with its relentless demands for global expansion, for new conquests in tech, real estate, and whispered, more shadowy ventures, became his true mistress long before Lilith Moreau ever stepped onto the scene. The dark secrets of his business dealings were just that, dark and secret, even from Elara. He moved in a world of high-stakes deals brokered in hushed tones, in rooms she was no longer invited into. The marital strain was a silent, insidious guest in their opulent home. Can a marriage survive when one partner is constantly choosing ambition over affection? It's a tough question, isn't it? Elara's loneliness became a constant companion, a chill that even the roaring fireplaces in Blackwood Manor couldn't dispel. The sprawling rooms echoed with the absence of shared laughter, of meaningful conversation. She was surrounded by beauty, by unimaginable wealth, yet she existed in a gilded cage, her wings clipped by a quiet, growing despair. Then came the discovery. A fragile, almost unbelievable hope. A secret pregnancy. 2 faint blue lines on a test that promised a new chapter, a chance perhaps to mend the fraying tapestry of their lives. She imagined Damien's surprise, his joy. Surely a child, their child, would be the anchor he needed, the reason to return to the man she'd fallen in love with. This became her silent vow, her desperate prayer. She'd tell him at her birthday party. It would be the perfect, joyful announcement, a beacon of hope in their fading dream. But the universe, or perhaps just Damien, had other plans. The unease that had been a faint whisper in Elara's heart grew louder in the weeks leading up to the party. It wasn't just the late nights anymore. There were hushed phone calls Damien would take in another room, a new, uncharacteristic secrecy about his schedule. One afternoon, tidying his usually immaculate study, a room that felt more like the command center of Blackwood Holdings than a part of their home, Elara found a small, velvet jeweler's box carelessly discarded in a drawer. Empty. It wasn't for her. Her birthday was weeks away, and Damien wasn't one for early gifts. A cold knot of fear tightened in her chest. Who was it for? This, she knew, was one of those dark secrets she wasn't meant to uncover. Was this the first tangible sign of an ambitious rival for her husband's affections? And what of Lilith Moreau? While Elara was planning a future, Lilith was carving out a present. Young, undeniably captivating, with an ambition that mirrored Damien's own, she'd entered his orbit as a high-flying marketing consultant for a new, daring venture of Blackwood Holdings. She was everything Elara, with her quiet grace and old-money sensibilities, was not. Lilith was fire and ice, a siren call to Damien's more extravagant desires, a woman who made him feel invincible, who didn't ask for his heart, only his attention, his power. Their bond, forged in the heat of late-night strategy sessions and secret dinners, away from the prying eyes of Ethelberg, was a dangerous cocktail of ambition and thrill. Did Damien see in Lilith a reflection of his own untamed nature, something he felt he'd had to temper with Elara? It's a chilling thought, what drives a man to such betrayals. So as Elara meticulously planned her birthday celebration, selecting flowers, tasting cakes, curating guest lists with her father, Theodore, she clung to her secret pregnancy, her last, best hope. Each detail of the party was a brushstroke in the masterpiece of reconciliation she hoped to paint. The hope and despair warred within her, a silent, exhausting battle. She was unaware, of course, that on the other side of Ethelberg, Damien was engaged in his own sinister preparations, orchestrating a different kind of spectacle entirely. He was making a different kind of promise. As Elara fastened the clasp of her diamond necklace, a family heirloom, its cool weight a familiar comfort, a silent vow formed in her heart. For her child, she would fight for this marriage, for the dream that was turning to dust. She would find the strength. She had to. But on the other side of Ethelberg, Damien was making a very different kind of promise, sealing a pact of audacious betrayal. Who was this Lilith Moreau, this woman, who now stood poised to shatter Elara's world? And what dark, irresistible power did she hold over the formidable, the unshakable, Damien Blackwood? Elara, radiant on the outside but a storm of anxiety within, made her way to greet her guests, each smile a carefully constructed mask. She had no idea the true performance was about to begin, with her husband as the director of her public humiliation. What was he thinking? The meticulous preparations, the silent vows, the carefully constructed mask of a society wife. All of it was background noise now, drowned out by the cacophony of Damien Blackwood's entrance. The grand doors of Blackwood Manor, those imposing sentinels of oak and iron, swung open, not to herald a king returning to his castle, but to admit a scandal that would attempt to bring a dynasty to its knees. And boy, did it make an entrance. Forget subtle. This was a full frontal assault. Damien Blackwood, ever the showman, paused dramatically at the threshold. But it wasn't his imposing figure, nor the almost predatory glint in his eyes, that seized the collective breath of Ethelberg's elite. It was the woman clinging to his arm. Lilith Moreau. Even her name sounded like a whisper of forbidden things. She was a vision in crimson, a dress so artfully constructed it seemed poured onto her lithe frame, sequins catching the chandelier light like scattered embers. Her hair, a cascade of raven silk, framed a face of exquisite, almost unnerving beauty. And that smirk. Oh, that smirk. It was a masterpiece of insolent confidence, a silent declaration that she knew exactly what she was doing, and reveled in it. Have you ever seen someone so brazen they almost take your breath away, not with beauty, but with sheer audacity? A wave of shock, palpable as a physical force, rippled through the grand ballroom. Champagne flutes paused midway to lips. Conversations died in strangled gasps. Fans fluttered a little faster in suddenly trembling hands. Who was this woman? And why, in the name of all that was sacred in their carefully ordered society, was she here, at Elara Vance's birthday party, on the arm of Elara Vance's husband? This wasn't just a breach of etiquette. This was a public humiliation, a billionaire's audacity laid bare for all to witness. The society scandal of the decade was unfolding in real time, and you could almost hear the mental gears of Ethelberg's gossip mill grinding into overdrive. Elara, from across the vast expanse of marble and milling guests, her eyes, wide with a dawning, sickening horror, locked with Damien's. His expression? Utterly unreadable. Cold. Indifferent. As if this were just another Tuesday, another business dealing, another conquest. The carefully constructed smile on Elara's face didn't just falter, it crumbled, turning to ash. The room, with its glittering chandeliers and fragrant blooms, began to tilt, the floor seeming to drop away beneath her. Disbelief was a fist clenching her throat, stealing her breath. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Not like this. The illusion of her life, the carefully polished facade of perfection, shattered into a million irreparable pieces. It was an unthinkable betrayal, a public stoning with her own husband casting the first and most brutal stone. Her father, Theodore Vance, a man whose quiet dignity was as legendary as Damien's ruthlessness, materialized at her side, his face a mask of controlled fury. His hand on her arm was a steadying anchor in the sudden, violent storm. "Elara?" he murmured, his voice low but laced with a protective anger that was almost terrifying. But what could she say? What words could possibly encapsulate the maelstrom of devastation that was ripping through her? The whispers, at first a low hum, rose in volume, a sibilant tide of speculation and judgment. Stares, like tiny daggers, pricked at her skin. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, a burning flush of public humiliation so intense it was a physical pain. This was supposed to be her night, a celebration of her life, her future. Instead, it had become her public execution. And for what? What secret, twisted motive could drive Damien to such an act of brazen cruelty? Amidst the sea of shocked and secretly thrilled faces, Elara spotted Beatrice Holloway, Ethelberg's most notorious society columnist, her pen already flying across her notepad, her eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. Elara's stomach churned. Tomorrow's headlines were already writing themselves. The dread of that future public shaming was a fresh layer of torment. Then a small, unexpected kindness. Her oldest friend, Clara Ashworth, a woman whose loyalty had never wavered, slipped an arm around Elara's waist, her presence a silent shield. "Breathe, Elara," Clara whispered, her voice fierce. "Just breathe. We'll face this." A tiny pinprick of light in the overwhelming darkness. But how do you face an enemy who holds all the power, who seems to delight in your pain? It's a terrifying question, isn't it? And Damien? He was utterly shameless. With a dismissive glance towards Elara, a glance that didn't even register her pain, her shock, her existence, he guided Lilith Moreau deeper into the ballroom. He paraded her, this scarlet woman, this symbol of his betrayal, as if she were the guest of honor. Some guests, those whose loyalty to the Vance family outweighed their fear of Damien Blackwood, turned away in open disgust. Others, the sycophants, the opportunists ever eager to curry favor with power, began to drift towards the newly arrived couple, their smiles as false as Damien's own. It was a sickening display of Ethelberg's fickle allegiances. Elara remained frozen, rooted to the spot, the champagne flute still clutched in her hand, so tightly she thought the delicate crystal might shatter. Her mind reeled, struggling to comprehend the enormity of what had just happened. This wasn't just a billionaire's dalliance, a sordid affair to be hidden in the shadows. This was a calculated act of war. The unthinkable betrayal had not only occurred, but had been flaunted, celebrated almost, in the very heart of her world. Her breath hitched, her heart a trapped bird against her ribs. This wasn't just an affair. This was a declaration of war waged on her soul, on her night. How could Damien be so cruel, so brazen? And what would she, the pregnant, humiliated wife, do next? The music resumed, a grotesque parody of celebration, as Damien paraded his mistress. Elara stood, a statue of ice and fire, her world irrevocably broken. The party, her life, would never be the same. The question now was, how would she survive the inferno? The music, which had momentarily stuttered into an awkward silence, now resumed with a forced, almost grotesque cheerfulness. It was a soundtrack to Elara's personal nightmare, a public spectacle orchestrated by the one man who had vowed to protect her. Some secrets are whispered in boudoirs, hushed confessions shared in the dead of night. Elara Vance felt an overwhelming urge to scream hers from the battlements of her broken heart. But the years of societal conditioning, the ingrained poise of the Vance lineage, held her captive. For now, Damien, with Lilith still clinging to his arm like a venomous vine, finally approached. The air crackled with unspoken animosity, a palpable tension that made the crystal chandeliers tremble. He leaned in, his cologne, once a scent of comfort, now an acrid reminder of his betrayal. "Happy birthday, darling," he murmured, the endearment a poisoned dart. His lips brushed her cheek in a perfunctory kiss, as cold and meaningless as a winter frost. The sheer audacity of it. How could a man inflict such public humiliation and then act as if nothing was amiss? It was a chilling display of his husband's cruelty, a calculated indifference that cut deeper than any shouted insult. Lilith Moreau, a shadow of smug triumph lurking behind Damien, then stepped forward. Her smile was a masterpiece of feigned politeness. "It's wonderful to finally meet you, Elara," she purred, her voice like velvet dipped in acid. "Damien has told me so much about you." The implication hung heavy in the air, a noxious perfume. Elara could barely manage a choked, "Likewise," the single word laced with a universe of pain and fury. She felt the eyes of Ethelberg's elite upon them, dissecting every nuance of this excruciating interaction. This was more than a society scandal. This was a public confrontation, and Elara was the unwilling star. Her father, Theodore Vance, ever her protector, moved swiftly to her side, his hand a comforting pressure on her arm. With a glare that could freeze lava, he took the microphone from the stunned bandleader, his voice, though quiet, resonating with an authority that few dared to challenge. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, a effectively hijacking the evening. "If I may have your attention for the birthday toasts." A collective sigh of relief and perhaps a twinge of disappointment from the scandalmongers rippled through the room. The immediate crisis, the frozen tableau of husband, wife, and mistress, was momentarily diffused. But the storm of betrayal was far from over. It was merely gathering strength. Dinner was an ordeal, a 12-course agony. Elara sat at the head table, a queen on a crumbling throne, flanked by her stoic father and the architect of her misery, Damien. Lilith Moreau was positioned uncomfortably close, a viper in their midst, her presence a constant, throbbing reminder of the shattered dreams. Every polite inquiry from a guest, every raised glass in her honor, felt like another twist of the knife. The emotional turmoil was a tempest within her, a chaotic blend of rage, hurt, and a profound, soul-deep despair. Yet, through it all, a tiny, insistent flutter in her womb, a secret pregnancy now perilously close to being exposed in the most brutal way, reminded her of what she was fighting for, or what she should be fighting for. Halfway through the interminable meal, as Theodore Vance rose to give his heartfelt birthday speech, praising Elara's compassionate heart and unwavering loyalty, words that now felt like ashes in her mouth, Elara made a decision. A desperate, reckless decision born of pain and a flicker of defiance. When her father finished, his eyes glistening with proud tears, he nodded to Elara. This was it. The moment she had planned, the joyous surprise she had rehearsed in her mind 1,000 times. But now it felt like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers. Could she do it? Should she? Summoning a courage she didn't know she possessed, Elara stood, her hand instinctively moving to rest on her still flat stomach. The room fell silent. "Thank you, Father," she began, her voice surprisingly steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. "And thank you all for being here tonight. I have a little surprise of my own to share." Her eyes scanned the room, landing on Damien. His expression was unreadable, a mask of cool indifference. Lilith watched with an almost hungry intensity, a spectator at a Roman circus, waiting for the lions. "I'm expecting a baby," Elara announced, the words tumbling out before she could second-guess herself. "Damien and I are going to have our first child." A collective gasp filled the air, louder this time, followed by a wave of applause and murmurs of congratulation. Pure pregnancy announcement drama. For a moment, a fragile hope flickered within Elara. Perhaps this news, this undeniable truth of new life, would pierce through Damien's armor of cold indifference. Her father embraced her, tears of genuine joy now streaming down his face. Many guests, unaware of the deeper currents of the evening's horrors, rushed to offer their good wishes. And Damien? He feigned a smile, a chillingly convincing performance. He leaned in, and for a horrifying instant, Elara thought he might actually show some warmth. Instead, he brushed another quick, cold kiss on her cheek, his whisper a sliver of ice in her ear. "You might have told me sooner, Elara." A cutting remark, delivered with surgical precision in front of dozens of curious onlookers. No joy, no surprise, just annoyance. The cruelty of it, the sheer, unadulterated meanness, was a physical blow. The secret revealed wasn't her pregnancy. It was the cavernous emptiness where her husband's heart should have been. This, she realized with a sickening lurch, was the true pattern Damien never broke. A pattern of calculated emotional cruelty. Across the room, Elara caught the eye of Lady Annabel Rochester, a woman Damien had been linked to years ago, before their marriage. Annabel's expression was one of knowing, almost pitying sympathy, a silent acknowledgement of shared experience. So, this was his game. The rest of the dinner passed in a blur of forced smiles and polite conversation. Elara watched Damien and Lilith from the corner of her eye, a tableau of casual intimacy, his head inclined towards her, their shared laughter, the subtle touches. It was as if Elara was an unwelcome ghost at her own feast. The humiliation was a constant, burning throb. Later, seeking a moment's respite from the suffocating atmosphere of the ballroom, Elara slipped out into the cool night air of the meticulously manicured gardens. The scent of night-blooming jasmine did little to soothe her frayed nerves. And there, seated on a stone bench, bathed in the soft glow of a hidden spotlight, was Lilith Moreau, scrolling through her phone with a smug, self-satisfied grin. Elara, fueled by a potent cocktail of rage, despair, and perhaps the fierce, protective instinct of impending motherhood, approached her. Bold choice, Elara began, her voice a low, dangerous tremor. Coming to my birthday party on the arm of my husband. Lilith looked up, not with surprise or guilt, but with that same infuriatingly pitying smile. Damien insisted I come, Elara. He said it was important for us to be seen together. And his pregnant wife? Elara's voice dripped ice. Was her presence also important to your public debut? Lilith had the audacity to tuck a strand of her dark hair behind her ear, a gesture of casual dismissal. Look, I'm sorry if this hurts you, Elara, but Damien and we have something real. He made it very clear your relationship was struggling, though I confess the pregnancy was a surprise. He never mentioned that little secret. Every syllable from Lilith's lips was a fresh twist of the knife, feeding Elara's fury. Did Damien paint her as some distant, loveless wife to justify his affair? How many secrets and lies had he spun? Did he tell you I was distant because he was never home? Elara shot back, her voice shaking. That I stopped trusting him because of his endless secrets? You may think you have something real, Lilith, but Damien's version of truth is as malleable as clay. He told you what you wanted to hear. Could Lilith see the manipulation, or was she too caught in Damien's charismatic web? Lilith's expression hardened. He's different with me. I'm not here to fight you, Elara. A wave of nausea, a toxic blend of anger and heartbreak, roiled within Elara. She pressed a hand to her belly, inhaling slowly. No, you're not here to fight, Elara said, her voice dangerously calm. You're here to gloat. But remember this, Lilith. The man who cheats with you will eventually cheat on you. It's a pattern he enjoys. Lilith opened her mouth to respond, perhaps to unleash another barbed comment, but the tension was abruptly shattered by the sound of approaching footsteps. They both turned. A figure emerged from the shadows of the rose trellises. Who was it? And would they be an ally in this emotional turmoil, or just another architect of her ever-increasing pain? The confrontation left Elara shaken but strangely resolute. The lines had been drawn, not just in the sand, but in the very fabric of her soul. This was more than a fight for her marriage. It was a fight for her sanity and her child's future. But how do you fight a man who holds all the cards, or so he thinks? The bitter exchange in the moonlit garden, sharp as shattered glass, had only solidified the icy dread in Elara's heart. Lilith's smug pronouncements, her casual dismissal of Elara's pain, echoed in the opulent silence of Blackwood Manor long after the last guest had departed. The party, meant to be a celebration, had become a funeral pyre for Elara's marriage, her hopes, her very sense of self. What do you do when the person who vowed to cherish you becomes the architect of your deepest humiliation? It's a question no one should ever have to answer, right? In the dead of night, with the echoes of that disastrous party haunting the cavernous halls of Blackwood Manor, Elara Vance walked towards her husband's study. She wasn't a supplicant, pleading for scraps of affection. No, she moved with the quiet dignity of a queen preparing to abdicate a poisoned throne. The scent of Damien's expensive whiskey and even more expensive cigars hung heavy in the air, a cloying miasma that spoke of late nights and secrets kept. She found him behind his massive mahogany desk, the glow of his computer screen, casting long, dancing shadows on his face, making him look like some brooding monarch surveying his empire. Or perhaps a predator assessing his prey. Damien, she began, her voice a subdued tremor, yet threaded with a steel she hadn't known she possessed. What you did tonight, it was beyond cruel. It was a public execution, on my birthday. You brought her here. The words, though spoken softly, hung in the air like a death sentence. He rubbed his temples, a gesture of weary impatience rather than remorse. Elara, look, I'm sorry if it had to happen this way. Sorry if it had to happen? As if this was some unavoidable natural disaster, not a deliberate act of his own making. But let's be honest, our relationship has been strained for a long time. Lilith is part of my life now. You need to accept that. Part of his life. Just like that. As if their vows, their shared history, the child growing within her, meant nothing. And I am your wife, Damien, she countered, the tremor in her voice now laced with a rising fury. I am carrying your child. Does that mean nothing to you? A flicker of something, guilt, annoyance, crossed his eyes, then vanished, replaced by that familiar mask of cool indifference. I know that, he said, his tone clipped, dismissive. But you've hardly been the supportive wife, have you? always criticizing my work, my absences, my choices. The audacity of it, the sheer, unadulterated nerve of the man. How could he twist this, turn her into the villain of this toxic marriage? "Because you pushed me away, Damien," she retorted, the words tumbling out, raw and ragged. "Every time I tried to reach for you, every time I tried to bridge the chasm you were creating between us, you vanished. Another business trip, another late night, another unexplained absence. Do you even hear yourself? Do you have any idea what it's like to live with a ghost?" He rose from his chair then, circling the desk like a caged panther, the faint light glinting off the expensive watch on his wrist. He looked tired, she noticed, shadows lurking beneath his eyes, a testament to the pressures of his empire. But any flicker of sympathy she might have felt was instantly extinguished by the memory of Lilith's smug face, of Damien's utter lack of remorse. "I'm under tremendous stress, Elara." "Yes," he conceded, his voice a low growl as he began to pace the length of the opulent study. The room suddenly felt too small, too suffocating. "We're finalizing a multi-billion-dollar merger with the Asian Consortium, a deal that will redefine Blackwood Holdings. I have a board meeting next week that could make or break our new renewable energy division. And now," he gestured vaguely towards her, "we have a baby on the way. Something, I might add, you didn't even bother to tell me privately until you announced it to the entire damn city tonight." Her anger flared, hot and fierce. "I planned to tell you privately, Damien. I've been trying to find the right moment for weeks, but you've been avoiding me, haven't you? We barely share a meal, let alone a meaningful conversation. When, exactly, was I supposed to tell you? Between your urgent calls and your clandestine dinners with her?" He rested his hands on the back of an ornate leather chair, letting out a long, weary sigh. "I can't do this right now, Elara. I just can't." She studied him for a long moment, the man she had once loved, the man who now felt like a dangerous stranger. And in that moment, a profound, almost terrifying clarity settled over her. The final confrontation she had dreaded was also, strangely, a moment of empowerment. The decision to leave this toxic marriage, a decision that had been a terrifying whisper in the back of her mind, now solidified into a certainty. For her unborn child's future, for her own sanity, she had to. "If you won't choose to be a husband, Damien," she said, her voice suddenly calm, devoid of the earlier tremor, "if you won't choose to be a father, then I will make a choice for myself, and for this child." Her words hung in the air, a quiet ultimatum, a wife's defiance finally taking flight. He frowned, a flicker of surprise, perhaps even unease in his eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means," Elara said, her voice gaining strength with every syllable, every beat of her newly resolute heart. "I'm considering leaving you, Damien. I can't endure this spectacle, not for me, and certainly not for our baby." Damien's face paled. Was it fear? Anger? Or just the shock of a tyrant realizing his queen was no longer willing to play by his rules? He opened his mouth as if to respond, to unleash another torrent of justifications or perhaps a husband's ultimatum, then closed it again, a rare moment of speechlessness for the usually eloquent Damien Blackwood. In that charged silence, Elara knew she had made her decision. No more. She would not be paraded around like a prized possession while he flaunted his affairs. She would not raise her child in a house built on lies and disrespect. Without waiting for his reply, a reply she knew would only be another attempt at manipulation, she turned on her heel and walked out of the study. Her steps echoed in the long, silent corridor, each one a resolute stride away from the gilded cage, away from the toxic charade, towards an unknown, perhaps perilous, but undeniably her own future. Back in the cold sanctuary of her bedroom, Elara shut the door and leaned against it, her body trembling, not with fear, but with a strange, exhilarating mix of sadness, anger, and an unexpected, intoxicating sense of freedom. She was done. Done pretending. Done playing the part of the compliant, forgiving wife. Done being broken. Tomorrow, the Ethelbert press would have a field day. Social media would explode, the scandal would reach new fevered heights. But tonight, as she placed a protective hand over her unborn child, Elara Vance felt a profound sense of calm. She would not be defined by Damien Blackwood's betrayal. She would forge her own path, even if she had to walk through fire to find it. The silence in Damien's study was heavy, laden with unspoken threats and the chilling finality of Elara's decision. She had walked away, But the battle was far from over. In fact, it was about to escalate to a war fought in the tabloids and courtrooms. How would Ethelberg react when the news broke? Her defiant exit from Damien's study, that cold, echoing pronouncement of, "I am leaving, Damien," wasn't just a personal decision. It was the spark that ignited a wildfire. A wildfire of public speculation, legal maneuvering, and a vicious, no-holds-barred media scandal. How would Ethelberg, a city that thrived on drama but feigned propriety, react when the pristine facade of the Blackwood marriage finally, irrevocably, crumbled? They were about to find out, and it was going to be ugly. The morning after Elara Vance walked out of Blackwood Manor, Ethelberg awoke to headlines that screamed betrayal, the city's insatiable hunger for scandal finally finding its feast. "Blackwood's birthday bombshell," shrieked one tabloid. "Pregnant wife, secret mistress, the ultimate society showdown," blared another. Paparazzi, like vultures scenting a kill, swarmed the gates of Blackwood Manor and the elegant townhouse Elara had retreated to, her father Theodore Vance's city residence. Every whispered rumor, every grainy photograph, every exclusive interview with a disgruntled former staff member became front-page news. Social media, of course, exploded. #Team Elara and Team Damien hashtags trended, though public sympathy fueled by the image of a beautiful pregnant wife so cruelly wronged overwhelmingly sided with Elara. But public sympathy, as Elara was about to learn, doesn't pay legal bills. And Damien Blackwood had an army of lawyers who played dirty. Elara, however, was no longer the naive, wilting flower. The events of that horrific night had forged something new within her, a core of tempered steel. Her first call was to Miss Evelyn Hayes, a woman whose reputation in Ethelberg's brutal divorce courts was as formidable as Damien's in the financial markets. Miss Hayes was a shark in Chanel, her smile disarming, her legal mind a lethal weapon. "Miss Vance?" she'd said, her voice calm and reassuring over the phone. "You've been through an ordeal, but you are not broken. We will fight this, and we will win." Hearing those words, Elara felt the first flicker of genuine hope since Damien had shattered her world. This wasn't just a divorce battle, it was a fight for her unborn child's future, for her own dignity. And you know what? She was ready. Are you ever truly ready for war, though? Especially against someone you once loved? Damien's PR machine, a well-oiled behemoth funded by the endless coffers of Blackwood Holdings, went into overdrive. Statements were issued, carefully crafted to paint Damien as the long-suffering husband, a victim of a difficult and emotionally fragile wife. The narrative they spun was insidious. Elara was unstable, her pregnancy hormones making her irrational, her accusations unfounded. They even dared to suggest she was using the pregnancy as leverage in the impending divorce. It was a classic case of character assassination, a slanderer's pen wielded with vicious precision. The sheer cruelty of it, trying to discredit her as a mother even before her child was born, was breathtaking. But should we be surprised? When a man like Damien feels cornered, will he stop at anything? Then came the legal tactics. Oh, the legal tactics. Drowning Elara in a sea of motions and counter-motions, challenging the prenuptial agreement she had signed in a haze of love and naivety years ago. A document Damien's lawyers now claimed was ironclad in his favor. They questioned her mental state, demanding psychiatric evaluations. They subpoenaed her friends, her staff, even her doctors, searching for any scrap of information they could twist to their advantage. It was a relentless onslaught, designed to break her, to bleed her dry emotionally and financially. The emotional toll was immense. Sleepless nights were spent staring at the ceiling, the weight of Damien's betrayal a physical ache in her chest. But every time she felt the gentle flutter of life within her, Elara's resolve hardened. She was fighting for two now, and that made all the difference. Just when Elara felt she was drowning, a lifeline appeared. An unexpected ally, Lady Beatrice Thornton, an old, dear friend of Elara's late mother and a grand dame of Ethelberg society, one of the few people whose influence could rival Damien's, gave an exclusive interview to a respected broadsheet. In it, she didn't just defend Elara. She publicly denounced Damien, hinting at a pattern of his unbecoming conduct over the years. It was a subtle but devastating blow to Damien's carefully cultivated public image. Suddenly, Team Elara had a powerful new champion. And perhaps, just perhaps, the tide was beginning to turn. What do you think? Can one person's courage truly make a difference against such overwhelming power? I think it can. I have to think it can. But Damien wasn't done. Not by a long shot. His next move was even more insidious. A concerned source leaked a carefully edited recording to a notorious gossip blogger, a recording of a private, tearful conversation between Elara and a friend, where Elara, in a moment of raw despair, had questioned her own sanity, her ability to cope. Taken out of context, it painted her as exactly what Damien's lawyers wanted the world to see: an unstable, hysterical woman. The secret of her deepest vulnerability, twisted and used against her. It was a new low, even for Damien. The media scandal reached a fever pitch. How much more could one woman take? The days blurred into a relentless cycle of legal consultations, hushed conversations with her father, and the constant, suffocating presence of the paparazzi. Elara felt like a hunted animal, her attempts to find peace constantly thwarted by Damien's relentless attacks. She was resilient, yes, but she was also human, vulnerable, and the constant barrage was taking its toll. The fight for custody, the battle over assets, the prenuptial agreement that seemed designed to leave her with nothing. It was all a brutal, ugly chess game, and Damien was playing to win, no matter the cost to her or to the memory of what they once shared. One particularly bleak afternoon, after another grueling meeting with Miss Hayes, where they'd waded through yet another pile of threatening legal documents designed to intimidate and exhaust her, Elara sat alone in her father's library. The legal papers felt like daggers, each word a calculated strike against her sanity, her motherhood. Damien wasn't just fighting for his assets. He was trying to annihilate her spirit, to erase her from his life as if she had never mattered. With her back against the wall, the wolves of the press still baying at her door, and the weight of the world on her shoulders, the phone rang. An unknown number. Elara hesitated, her heart pounding. Was it another threat? Another reporter? Or just maybe, was it a lifeline? Or another trap? Damien's campaign of slander was relentless, each headline a fresh wound. Elara knew that silence was no longer an option. She had to fight fire with fire, but on her own terms. The call she received could change everything. Would she dare to step into the lion's den of public opinion? That unexpected phone call, piercing the gloom of Elara's besieged existence, wasn't a threat. It wasn't another reporter sniffing for scraps. It was Vivian Croft, the Vivian Croft, Ethelberg's queen of broadcast journalism, a woman whose interviews could make or break careers, topple empires even. And she wanted to talk to Elara. On national television. Talk about a high-stakes gamble, huh? They called her the scorned wife, the broken socialite, the hysterical pregnant woman. Damien's relentless media strategy, his carefully planted secrets and insidious legal tactics, were painting a portrait of Elara as unhinged, unreliable. But Vivian Croft, a woman with an uncanny ability to see through facades, was about to show Ethelberg and the world the real Elara Vance. The phoenix rising. Or so Elara desperately hoped. The decision to do a tell-all interview was terrifying. It meant baring her soul, her pain, her vulnerability to millions. But what other choice did she have? Silence was Damien's playground. It was time to reclaim her voice, to fight back with the one weapon he couldn't control, the truth. Could a single interview truly shift public opinion, or was it a fool's errand against a billionaire's power? The days leading up to the interview were a blur of anxious preparation. Miss Evelyn Hayes, Elara's formidable lawyer, prepped her relentlessly, not on what to say, the truth needed no script, but on how to say it, how to remain poised under pressure, how to navigate Vivian Croft's famously incisive questions, how to convey strength without sacrificing vulnerability. Elara, meanwhile, drew strength from the tiny life fluttering within her, a constant, precious reminder of why this media strategy, this terrifying leap into the public eye, was so critical. She was fighting for her child's future, a future free from the shadow of Damien's cruelty and manipulation. The studio was an oasis of calm amidst the media storm raging outside. Soft lighting, comfortable armchairs, the low hum of a professional crew. Vivian Croft greeted Elara with a warmth that was surprisingly genuine. "Remember, Elara," Vivian murmured, her eyes full of a keen intelligence, "you're in control. This is your story." Easier said than done when your heart is hammering like a trapped bird, right? And then the lights, the cameras. Vivian Croft's first question, gentle yet direct. Elara, you've remained largely silent since the reports of your husband's indiscretion emerged. Why choose to speak now? Elara took a breath. This was it. No turning back. Because, Vivian, she began, her voice clear, though a tremor of emotion lurked beneath the surface. Silence allows others to control the narrative. And I am tired of having my story, my life, dictated by Damien Blackwood. I want people to understand that I am not just Damien Blackwood's wife. I am Elara Vance, and I have my own truth to tell. The interview unfolded, a masterclass in quiet dignity and devastating honesty. Elara didn't resort to histrionics, to mudslinging. She simply told her story, the pain of the public humiliation at her birthday party, the crushing weight of Damien's betrayal, her love for her unborn child, her dawning realization that the man she had married was a stranger, capable of unimaginable cruelty. She spoke of the facade of perfection they had maintained, and the lonely, gilded cage her life had become. It was a powerful, emotional performance, all the more compelling for its understated sincerity. Vulnerability and strength intertwined. Vivian Croft, true to her reputation, didn't shy away from the tough questions. There have been allegations, Elara, from your husband's legal team that you are emotionally unstable due to your pregnancy. How do you respond to that? A faint, sad smile touched Elara's lips. Unfortunately, Vivian, that's a common tactic, isn't it? To discredit a woman, especially a pregnant woman, by questioning her sanity. I am under a doctor's care, and I assure you and your viewers that I am perfectly capable of making rational decisions. In fact, she added, her voice gaining a quiet power, this pregnancy has made me more clear-headed, more determined than ever before. I know what I want for my child, and it's not a life built on lies and deceit. Mic drop. You could almost hear the collective gasp across Ethelberg. Then came the unexpected truth. A moment that would crack Damien's carefully constructed facade. Vivian asked about the prenuptial agreement, a document Damien's team had been brandishing like a weapon. Elara, guided by Miss Hayes, didn't contest its legal standing. Instead, she revealed a small, devastating detail. A clause Damien had insisted upon. A clause so controlling, so demeaning, it painted a vivid picture of his manipulative nature. She didn't need to raise her voice. The quiet horror of that revelation, that particular secret of his need for absolute control, was enough. It was a masterful stroke, reclaiming her voice without resorting to his level. The public reaction was immediate, overwhelming. Team Elara went viral. Social media exploded with messages of support, of admiration for her courage, her dignity. Elara Vance was no longer the broken socialite. She was a symbol of resilience, a woman fighting for her child, for her truth. A cornered animal is dangerous, but what about a cornered billionaire? Damien Blackwood watched the interview from his penthouse apartment, the city lights of Ethelberg twinkling mockingly below. His face, as described later by an anonymous source, probably his terrified PR chief, was a mask of incandescent fury. He had underestimated her. Badly. His carefully orchestrated campaign of character assassination had been blown apart by Elara's quiet, devastating honesty. His phone rang incessantly. Board members, business partners, even Lilith Moreau, her voice reportedly a mix of panic and recrimination. "She's destroying you, Damien," Lilith had allegedly shrieked. "Public sympathy is entirely with her. They're calling her a saint, and you, well, you're the unfaithful billionaire villain." The irony wasn't lost on anyone, was it? His PR team scrambled, issuing a hastily drafted counter-statement, full of mealy-mouthed regrets and renewed and entirely unbelievable commitments to resolving matters amicably. It fell flat. Utterly flat. The damage was done. Damien Blackwood, the master manipulator, the man who shaped narratives, had lost control of his own. His billionaire's downfall was becoming a public spectacle. But a wounded animal is a dangerous one. And Damien Blackwood was wounded. Badly. The interview was a triumph for Elara, a turning point in the public perception of their divorce battle. But she knew with a chilling certainty that it was also a declaration of war. A war that Damien, enraged and humiliated, would now escalate. The legal pressure intensified. New motions were filed, each one more vicious, more personal than the last. They weren't just fighting over assets anymore. Damien was trying to prove her an unfit mother, to seize control of the narrative, of her child, of her very future. The threatening legal documents piled up, each one a calculated strike against her sanity, her motherhood, I felt a chilling premonition, a tightening knot of fear. What desperate, unthinkable lengths would Damien Blackwood go to now to silence her, to crush her, to win at any cost? The glare of the television lights had faded, but the heat of Damien's fury had not. Each legal document, each whispered threat, was a tightening of the noose. The glare of the television lights had faded, but the heat of Damien's fury had not. Each legal document, each whispered threat funneled through his stone-faced attorneys, was a tightening of the noose. There are cages of iron, built with cold, hard bars, and then there are cages of gold, velvet, and fear. The kind Damien Blackwood was so adept at constructing. Elara Vance knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had to break free from the latter before it consumed her, and the new life, her precious unborn child, nestled within her. This wasn't just about her anymore, was it? When you're fighting for your child, the stakes are infinitely higher. You find a mother's courage you never knew you possessed. The relentless legal attacks were one thing. The constant, insidious threat to her child's future, however, was pushing Elara to a breaking point. Damien's lawyers, those slick purveyors of manufactured outrage, were now escalating their psychological warfare. They filed motions questioning her fitness as a mother, citing her emotional distress, a distress he had caused, as grounds to seek future restrictions on her custody. Can you imagine the sheer, unmitigated gall? The audacity. It was a desperate, cruel tactic designed to terrify her into submission, to make her crawl back into that gilded cage he had so expertly constructed. His behavior became increasingly unhinged, a potent cocktail of a billionaire's bruised ego and a cornered animal's lashing fury. He was, in short, a man unraveling, and a man like Damien Blackwood unraveling was a very dangerous thing indeed. Her emotional turmoil was a constant, roiling sea. Fear, cold and sharp, would pierce her in the dead of night. Desperation, a heavy cloak, would threaten to smother her during the day. But beneath it all, a fierce, primal protective instinct for her baby burned like an unquenchable flame. This child, her child, would not grow up in the shadow of this toxic marriage, this web of deceit and manipulation. That much she vowed. The secret nobody knew, not even her staunch father Theodore, nor her fiercely loyal lawyer Miss Evelyn Hayes, was how close Elara came to completely breaking down. There were nights spent on the cold bathroom floor, tears streaming, her body racked with sobs of utter desolation. Days when the thought of facing another barrage of legal papers, another smirking pronouncement from Damien's camp, felt like an insurmountable mountain. She was tired, so incredibly tired of fighting. But then she would feel that tiny flutter, that gentle kick, a reminder of the innocent life depending on her, and the mother's courage would surge anew. It was during one of these dark nights of the soul, when the weight of Damien's relentless psychological warfare felt unbearable, that a sudden, almost divine inspiration struck. A desperate escape, a flight to freedom. If she couldn't win the war on his terms, in his city, then she would change the battlefield. She would disappear. It was a life-changing decision, a terrifying leap into the unknown. But the alternative, staying, fighting this endless, soul-crushing battle, risking her child's well-being, was simply unthinkable. The planning began in the utmost secrecy, a secret plan known only to a handful of trusted souls. Her destination, Cressida, a serene, idyllic country nestled far across the ocean, a place of rolling green hills and ancient whispering forests. Her Aunt Genevieve, her mother's beloved sister, owned a secluded estate there, a place of peace and healing. Elara had visited as a child. It was the perfect sanctuary, far from the prying eyes of the Ethelbert press, far from Damien's suffocating reach, or so she hoped. Could any distance truly shield her from a man with Damien's resources, his obsessive need for control? It was a risk she had to take. The logistics were a nightmare. Arranging private transport, securing travel documents under an assumed name, a contingency Miss Hayes had wisely, if shockingly, prepared for. Transferring a small, carefully concealed portion of her personal funds her father had quietly ensured were outside Damien's legal grasp. Every step was fraught with peril, the fear of discovery a constant, gnawing companion. What if Damien found out? What if one of his spies, and she had no doubt he had them, got wind of her plan? The thought was enough to send shivers of pure ice down her spine. The day of her departure arrived, a gray, drizzly Ethelberg morning that mirrored the turmoil in Elara's soul. The tension was almost unbearable. Her bags, packed with only the barest essentials, a few changes of clothes, her most precious mementos, and a small, worn copy of her mother's favorite book of poetry, sat by the door of her father's townhouse, a silent testament to her desperate escape. Theodore Vance held her close, his usual stoicism cracking, tears glistening in his proud, worried eyes. "Be safe, my darling girl," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Be strong, for yourself, for your child." Then came the unexpected element, the last-minute obstacle that nearly derailed everything. As Elara, her face pale but resolute beneath a wide-brimmed hat and dark glasses, was about to step into the waiting, inconspicuous town car Miss Hayes had arranged, a sleek black limousine, unmistakably one of Damien's, pulled up to the curb. Her heart leaped into her throat. Had he found out? Was this it? The gilded cage brake foiled before it even began? The door of the limousine opened, and Damien himself emerged, tall, imposing, his face a mask of cold fury. "Oh God. Going somewhere, Elara?" he drawled, his voice dangerously soft, a predator toying with its prey. This was it, the mini-climax before the true climax of her flight to freedom. For a heart-stopping moment, Elara froze, her mind raced. What could she say? What could she do? But then, Miss Evelyn Hayes, ever the cool-headed tactician, stepped smoothly between them. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her voice as crisp and cutting as a shard of ice. "Miss Vance has a prior engagement. If you have any further communications for her, please direct them through my office, as per our previous agreement." She exuded an aura of such unshakable legal authority that even Damien, for once, seemed momentarily taken aback. He glared at Elara, his eyes burning with a possessive rage that made her blood run cold. But he didn't try to stop her. Not physically, anyway. The unspoken threat, however, hung heavy in the air. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The journey to the private airfield was a blur of anxiety. Every passing car, every unfamiliar face felt like a potential threat. The hushed departure itself was a masterclass in covert operations, orchestrated by Miss Hayes' discreet security team. A small, unmarked jet waited on the tarmac, its engines a low, promising hum. As Elara finally sank into the plush leather seat, the cabin door closing with a reassuring thud, a wave of exhaustion so profound it was almost debilitating, washed over her. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope. The jet taxied, then accelerated down the runway, lifting into the gray, weeping sky. Elara watched as Ethelberg, the city of her birth, her marriage, her heartbreak, shrank below, its glittering skyscrapers receding into a distant, painful memory. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, a tear of sorrow for the life she was leaving behind, for the shattered dreams, for the man she had once loved. But it was also a tear of profound relief, of dawning hope for the new beginning that awaited her, for the uncertain future she was now, finally, charting on her own terms. As the city lights of Ethelberg faded into a distant, painful memory, Elara clutched her belly, the tiny flutter within a promise of a new, albeit uncertain, dawn. She had escaped Damien's immediate grasp, broken free from that gilded hell. But the question, a cold whisper in the quiet hum of the jet engines, remained. Was any distance truly enough to shield her and her unborn child from a man of his power, his wealth, his terrifying obsession? And what, oh what, would Damien Blackwood do when he discovered his queen had well and truly flown the coop? The hum of the jet was a lullaby of liberation, but also a drumbeat of the unknown. Cressida awaited, a haven, or perhaps just a temporary respite. The war with Damien Blackwood was not over. It had merely changed battlefields. What awaited her in this new land, and how would she rebuild her shattered life? The hum of the private jet was a deceptive lullaby, a whisper of liberation that couldn't quite drown out the drumbeat of the unknown future. Cressida. A name that sounded like a sigh of relief. But would it be a true haven for Elara Vance, or merely a temporary respite in her ongoing war with Damien Blackwood? That was the multi-billion-dollar question, wasn't it? In the tranquil embrace of Cressida, far, far away from the glittering venom and suffocating opulence of Ethelberg, Elara Vance finally learned to breathe again. Not the shallow, panicked gasps of fear and humiliation that had become her constant companions, but the deep, steady rhythm of hope. Real hope. The kind that settles in your bones and whispers, "You got this." Her Aunt Genevieve, a woman whose spirit was as resilient and timeless as the ancient oaks dotting her sprawling countryside estate, welcomed Elara not with pitying questions, but with open arms, endless cups of calming herbal tea, and the quiet understanding of a soul who had weathered her own share of storms. It was exactly what Elara needed. No judgment, just peace. The guest cottage, nestled amongst rambling roses and overlooking a serene willow-fringed pond, became Elara's sanctuary, a world away from Blackwood Manor, yet infinitely more precious in its simplicity. Here, the only headlines were the chirping of crickets at dusk and the gentle lapping of water against the reedy bank. The paparazzi were a distant, almost forgotten nightmare. The relentless digital storm of social media, with its Team Elara and Team Damien skirmishes, felt like it was happening on another planet. Can you even imagine the relief? To finally escape that constant scrutiny, that feeling of being perpetually on display? Days melted into weeks, each one a small step on Elara's healing journey. She walked for hours through dew-kissed fields, the soft Cressidan air a balm to her bruised spirit. She rediscovered her love for painting, a talent she had neglected during her years as Damien Blackwood's perfectly curated wife. Canvases, once blank and intimidating, now bloomed with color, with emotion, with the tentative unfurling of her own, reclaimed self-discovery. She spent long afternoons reading by the crackling fireplace, curled up in a worn armchair that smelled faintly of lavender and old books, the words of long-dead poets offering a strange, profound comfort. She was focusing on her health, on the precious new beginnings she carried within her. A life untainted by Damien's toxicity. Motherhood. It was a word that now filled her not with dread, but with a fierce protective love and an unbreakable spirit. Of course, Ethelberg and Damien were never entirely absent from her thoughts. Miss Evelyn Hayes kept her updated with carefully encrypted calls on the legal machinations still unfolding across the ocean. Damien, as expected, was incandescent with rage at Elara's disappearance. His lawyers were apoplectic, filing motions demanding her return, accusing her of everything they could possibly think of. But legally, Elara was free to travel, and Cressida, with its quaint, almost archaic privacy laws, was proving to be an excellent shield. The media frenzy in Ethelberg, deprived of its primary target, had, for now, somewhat abated, much to Damien's reported fury. He wasn't used to not getting his own way, was he? What happens when a man who controls everything suddenly loses control of the one thing, or rather, the one person he thought he owned? It's a dangerous game, and Elara knew it. Her father Theodore remained her rock, managing her affairs in Ethelberg, a quiet, unshakable bulwark against Damien's escalating attempts to do whatever it is a spurned billionaire tyrant does. Retaliate? Implode? Perhaps a bit of both. The specifics of Damien's fate, however, were no longer Elara's primary concern. Her focus was singular. Her baby, her future, a new life built on foundations of love, integrity, and resilience. She was no longer just Damien Blackwood's wife, an accessory to his empire. She was Elara Vance, mother-to-be, survivor, and, most importantly, the architect of her own goddamn destiny. That was the secret power she had unearthed within herself, a strength forged in the crucible of betrayal and heartbreak. Elara often walked the dew-kissed fields of Cressida as dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and gold, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly. A quiet strength, a fierce determination, shining in her eyes. She had faced the beast in his gilded lair and walked out of the fire, not unscathed. No, the scars would always remain, a testament to her journey. But she was reborn. Her future, and that of her child, was a blank canvas, vibrant with possibility, ready for her to paint in colors of her own choosing, a masterpiece of hope. But even in the tranquil sanctuary of Cressida, one question sometimes lingered in the otherwise peaceful air, a faint, unsettling echo from her past life. When a man like Damien Blackwood, a man of such monumental ego and obsessive control, is defied so completely, does he ever truly let go? Or was this merely a ceasefire, a pause before the next, perhaps even more brutal, offensive? Elara's journey, from the glittering hell of Ethelberg to the sun-dappled peace of Cressida, is a testament to the incredible courage it takes to rewrite your own story, even when the ink you're forced to use is your own tears. It's about finding that unbreakable spirit within, even when you think you're shattered beyond repair. If her fight for freedom, for dignity, for the future of her child resonates with you, if you've ever felt trapped in your own gilded cage, then share her story. Let it inspire others to find their own dawn after the darkest night. And tell me, what would you do if faced with an impossible choice, a betrayal that rips your world apart? Would you crumble, or would you find the strength to fly? Subscribe for more stories of incredible resilience, of hope for the future, and the unbreakable human spirit that refuses to be extinguished. Don't miss out on what's coming next, because everyone deserves their own sunrise.